Welcome to your podcast, Leadership is Tricky, where we'll tackle various topics, challenges, and experiences as it relates to your investment in leadership. So, let's design success together. Now your hosts. Hey everyone, welcome back to Leadership is Tricky. I'm back on with Steven. How you doing, Steven?
What's up, Eric? How you doing, man?
Oh, I can't complain. I'm excited. It's season 4. We closed out season 3 in good fashion with a lot of good episodes last season. I think this season is going to be probably our best one ever because we got a lot of firepower lined up and various guests coming on. But I know you've been taking some time off to get your life situated. So what's been going on with you?
Lots, making an intercontinental move with the family, trying to get situated in a new place that I've never lived, meeting new people, new job, new requirements and responsibilities, kids getting older, getting more active in things. I mean, parenting and life and just, things like that. It's been a roller coaster. We could always, I think, tee that up for a nice conversation that would be really good to work through and see where that transition's going. But you know what? The good thing is we're pretty much grounded now. So I've actually lived in 2 houses since I left the other continent that we lived in. So to say the least, the good things are, like, I'm still married, kids are still alive, cats haven't died. So things are good. I mean, I can't complain about the basic necessities,
Perfect. Got a mortgage again, and family's good.
Gotta live the American dream, quote unquote, right?
Yeah. So we have a very special guest today, and it's Darion Akins. Darion is someone who I met when I went to the OMR festival in Hamburg, Germany, almost a year ago this week, I think. So welcome to the podcast, Darion. How are you?
Well, thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here, and nice to meet you, Stephen. Life's good. I can't really complain. Recently, well, I guess as of last summer, moved back to the United States and getting settled in again, and seems to be going pretty well. So I can't really complain.
And you're back in D.C. now, right?
Correct.
Oh man, I-95 bandit.
Back in the mothership. But what is it? The movie called Clint Eastwood in The Line of Fire. He's like, I'm a proponent of public transportation, so I don't like to. I don't take the drive.
Man,
I like being driven.
That's great.
So which one are you? Are you slugging? Are you on the subway? How are you getting in?
Where I live, there's an express bus that takes the HOV lane. So for door to door, it takes me like about 45 minutes. It's not bad at all.
No, that's not bad at all. I know when I lived in the Beltway, it took me an hour and a half in the morning, 2.5 in the back. Oof. Yeah, it was miserable, but yeah, I make life decisions every day, get on the expressway. So
yeah, no, I'm not complaining about the commute. It's pretty good.
Nice. So we met and we kind of scheduled this almost a year ago, saying, hey, we're going to get on, we'll get you on. And I know everyone was transitioning. I was probably the only one kind of grounded in my situation. So, so just what I want to do is just take a moment for you to introduce yourself to the audience. Just tell us a bit about yourself and then we'll go from there.
Well, very good. Yeah. So, as you already said, my name is Darion Akins, and I am a senior Foreign Service officer at the State Department. For those who might not know, the Foreign Service is the part of the State Department, and we're the ones responsible for carrying out our relationships with foreign countries, and so we do that through our embassies and consulates around the world. As for me, I was born in a little small town in Oklahoma. You've never heard of it, so I won't mention it, but it's a little small town, perpetual population 6,000, and definitely I did not think that I would ever be in the career that I am in. When I was about 11, 12, I moved to Texas, which is where my formative years were. And then after graduating high school, I went to Texas A&M University, where I studied, started out in business, didn't go as planned. And so I switched into political science, but I was too far down that road to kind of give it all up. So I ended up getting an interdisciplinary degree with political science and business. Um, and funny enough, my first year out of university, I was an educator. So I taught high school grades 9 through 12, American history, and the prep courses for the PSAT and SAT. I won't bore you with the long story how that happened, but anyway, it happened. And I enjoyed teaching. I love the kids. Parents, not so much.
Right.
So then I moved on from that and joined the Peace Corps. That's where I was introduced to the Foreign Service. For the first time, I met a Foreign Service officer who, after he got to know me, he thought that I might make a good Foreign Service officer, but I was still young, full of vim and vigor, and he didn't do much more than plant a seed. But fast forward a few years later, I was working in Japan, and kind of thought that now it's about the time I need to find a career. And eventually, while I was in Japan, I took the test, and the rest, as they say, is history. And then I've been in the Foreign Service for the last almost 21 years. This summer to be 21 years.
Wow. No, that's cool. So yeah, so we come back a little bit. I know you didn't want to mention your town of Oklahoma, but maybe one of those 6,000 people are listening. So yeah,
Well,
so
I can tell you, it's Hugo, Oklahoma. I just know that they've never heard of it. It's called the City of Abundant Water.
right.
And it's about 25 miles north of Paris, Texas, right across the Red River, if you kind of know.
Yeah, so you're right. I've never heard of it. What about you, Steve?
I forewarned you.
Yeah, it's all good. So yeah, so tell us about growing up, and I know you split time between Oklahoma and Texas, right? So around
Right.
11 or 12, you moved in, early teenage years. So tell us about growing up in those areas.
So Hugo, it's like any typical rural American town. Not much there, great, wonderful people. But I guess what I would point out, at least my time, my time in Hugo, Oklahoma, the thing that I took away most from that is, if you'll allow me the indulgence of telling you a little bit of story about my grandparents. So my mother's parents, they owned a nursing home, and it was great growing up, getting to see them own a business. And as I grew up, I got to hear the story of how that came to be, because my grandmother, she got a nursing certificate, nursing degree, I think back in the 1940s, and she, no one would hire her, as a Black woman at that time, no one would hire her. And then so my grandfather eventually said to her, well, Hazel, what do you want to do? And she said, if I had my druthers, I'd like to own a nursing home. And he said, okay, so we're gonna make that happen. And growing up and just listening to the way that they had to overcome the challenges to establish the nursing home, that kind of instilled me with a sense of like grit, determination, that that, like, never let people tell you no, you pursue your own path in life. And so that kind of sums up my time in Hugo. And then my parents and I moved to Texas, and I went to I think I started the sixth grade. Oh no, I started in the fifth grade in Texas, and went through high school there. And I think still to this day, I still have quite a number of friends from my high school days. And then a few of us went off to Texas A&M after that. And then at Texas A&M is where I met my best friend. We've been friends now for, God, 30 years.
Right. Yeah, every time you throw a number out there, you start to think about, man, I'm seasoned.
Yeah, well, yeah, like fine wine, Eric, fine wine.
That's it. I'm more like boxed wine at this point, right? Yeah, so everything you've told me though, even starting back with your grandparents and then going into the Peace Corps and going into teaching and all these things to serve, like, did you just always have this calling to lead, or was that just, grounded in your, grandparents' kind of struggle and circumstance that kind of propelled you forward?
I guess that I was a bit of I won't say nerdy. It's not the proper. I was a little bit unusual,
Studious?
and pardon?
Studious?
Um, I wouldn't even say I was studious, but I did have, I'll say this. I had a curiosity about the world. Genuinely had a curiosity about the world. I remember I would read the TV guide. You know, most people would like look at the TV guide, what TV shows are on. Well, no, I'm reading the TV guide, and I always want to know which news programs were on. And from a very young age, I really wanted to know about the world. And that's the thing I can say the most, but I didn't really know where I was going, what it meant to me. I was just curious. Um, and I had, I was your typical child. I wanted to be a policeman, then I wanted to be a fireman, then I wanted to be a doctor, then I wanted to be a lawyer, then I wanted to be a business person, but I didn't know what that meant. Um, and it really didn't start to come into focus until I was at university of, well, I know I want to do something that allows me to explore the world, to see the world, but I don't know what that is. And so I think that is why I did a number of, started a number of careers or started a number of activities trying to find my way in life. And I took my time. And I guess the where I was lucky is that I was able to hold off on certain life decisions until I found my path. I mean, I didn't get married, I didn't buy a house, I didn't take the job that I had to take to pay off the loans and things like that. I really tried to find my path in life, and so I think that was the more interesting part. And so, like I said, it wasn't until Peace Corps where that seed was planted, and then it wasn't until I was in Japan where I finally that seed germinated. And I was like, yeah, if I look back over all of my experiences since university, that path makes a lot of sense.
Hey,
Right.
Darion, so let me jump in here. I want to maybe pry a little bit after your comments on didn't make life decisions. My perspective is you were still making life decisions, maybe not the traditional ones that a lot of us talk about with, like you said, finding a spouse or a mate in life and like signing up for the house and the mortgage and finding roots and all those things. I feel like you were still making some really cool, like listening to your intro, the teaching thing and helping young minds, become greater than they could probably ever imagine. And then what I want to ask you though is from that to the Peace Corps, you kind of went over that relatively quickly. Can you talk about why you thought about, serving in, really not a glamorous job, but you get to go out and, catch this curiosity that you're talking about, go see something new and travel and do all those things. Like what caused you to want to join up with the Peace Corps?
Well, no, it was as you pointed out that I did have this sense I wanted to give back to the community, but I didn't have a good sense of what that was. Just I wanted to give back to the community. So that's why I taught in an inner city school in Dallas. For lack of better terminology, I was headhunted to do that. They wanted male teachers, particularly Black male teachers, to work in the inner city schools. And so I went through the process of getting provisionally licensed to do that. And as I said, I loved the kids. I loved the job. The parents made it a little bit of a challenge. And I still had that desire. And somehow Peace Corps came into being. Then I still had that desire that I wanted to give back, and someone had mentioned to me about Peace Corps, so I looked into that while I was still teaching, and then I eventually signed up to do that and went into the Peace Corps, and it very much was the idea that I thought I'm going to go overseas and help all of these people, and why that was life changing was that was the attitude that I entered the service with. Like, I as an American, going to go over and going to help people who are less advantaged than us. And I will tell you, I walked away from that experience more enriched, gaining more from them than I ever gave them. And that helped me to gain a better perspective of my place in the world. Like, it is not about what we traditionally think of and what we can give and what we can do, and that we're helping other people. It kind of gets to, I think, I've heard in a couple of your podcast episodes where you're talking about being a servant leader. It's not about you as a leader. If you're a true leader, it's about you serving others and trying to make them find their path, find their strength, find what they're good at. And this is why it was rather contrary to my initial thoughts, is that when I went into the Peace Corps, Zambians helped me to find myself, to find my path, to find what skills I had, what talents I possessed, what I was good at, because it made me take a really deep look at myself. And so from there, I had a really good understanding of who I was by the end of the service, whereas going in, I didn't.
Right.
Yeah, I think that speaks volumes. You talked about servant leadership and making it about bigger than yourself, and like you said, going off and promoting Western and democratic ideals and the things that Americans bring. What an experience it would have been, just to kind of, like what you said, listen, learn, understand the local culture, the local population and humans that are there. And I think strip all of the American and the idealistic things that that our country's trying to do. At the end of the day, we're just people, pretty much probably getting after the same core values and intrinsic motivations that most of us want in life. And you were in a position to give a little bit of yourself, and then it sounds like you got even more after giving what you gave. So commend you for that. I think that naturally kind of brings us to, you did the Peace Corps for a hot minute there and got to learn about yourself and kind of what your purpose in life is. And it sounds like you made a really strong life decision there that 21 years later you're still doing. Can you talk a little bit about like being a Foreign Service officer and why that sparked something inside of you to choose that as your profession?
Yeah, and I have to tell you a little bit of a story about that first. So, because this is where it all came from.
Sure.
I had a counterpart in Zambia. So the person, a Zambian that I worked with to do projects and programs. And one day he said, hey, he called me Akins. He said, Akins, I got a question for you. And I said, okay. And he said, I know, America is a wealthy society. But I also know that there are Americans who don't receive an education. And he's like, and I don't understand why. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you have a public school system, and some people don't go through the public school system. But even more so than that, you have a public library system. So like I have to pay for my kids to go to school here. And I have to pay for everything. There is no public library system. I have to pay for them to go to school. And I said, yeah. And he said, so even if you live in a community where you think the school system is horrible, most Americans still would have access to public libraries. And I said, yes. And he said, so then why wouldn't they educate themselves through the library system? And that was enlightening. I had never, when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that's true. So that started me down this path. And then I started thinking, because as I went through my Peace Corps service and looking at America from the outside in, I did become more patriotic in this sense, that I was thinking, what makes us unique? And here's what I kind of came up with, and this is also going back to my time in Zambia, is that I felt that while America has made many mistakes in its history and its past, and it continues to make a few, the promise of what and who we are is the thing that I looked at. And what I mean by that is, when I looked around the world and I had started to travel, I realized that America, definitely of the more developed countries, influential countries, is the only one where you choose your citizenship. And what I mean by that is that someone in our past chose for us to either immigrate to America, to come to America, or we, as an American, we chose that ourselves and naturalized as citizens. And that is uniquely different in the world. And I felt like if the United States could get that right, if we could truly make it where, because currently, if I went around the world and I wanted to be a citizen of another country, and I really loved the culture, I loved the language, I wanted to learn everything about that place, I wanted to be whatever that was. In most cases, it's not possible. Most places, they will tell you, no, you don't have the blood, your parents are not from here, that's just not possible. Whereas America, that's possible. And I think that says a lot about where we can go in the world. That thought led me into, wait a minute, I can do this through the Foreign Service. I can promote that idea, that concept, and serve the country, and promote this idea that, there is hope for the world to choose to do things together. And the rest, as they say, is history, because I started the process and I came in, and as part of that, every country that I've ever served in, I participate in what we call our public diplomacy platform, where I go out and I talk to students, high school students and college students. And so this issue comes up constantly. So I'm able to, discuss that idea in a lot of ways. And so I appreciate being able to do that.
Yeah. So, thanks for that too. And so being a foreign service officer, right, you're out there communicating to foreign governments on international issues and, represent our country's interests in that regard, right? And that's a lot of pressure. That's, Steve and I, we work for the Department of Defense, and, we always see ourselves as, the spokesperson for, the US as we're out here traveling through the world. But, you're actually in a position of authority, formal authority to do that, negotiating treaties and agreements and, working through consulates and all of that. But, how do you prepare for something like that, for that responsibility to put on your shoulders?
For me, it is approaching it with the idea that I simply have to do what I think is right. What are we trying to achieve, and determine like what I think is the best path forward. Because the higher you rise, particularly in the Foreign Service, there are no people to tell you, yeah, you're doing a good job, yeah, that's great. You have to have a sense of, well, this is what I think, this is the path that I'm going to follow. And typically the only feedback you'll get is when you get off when you somehow take a detour and people are like, hey, we don't think that that's the proper path. But typically it's having a good sense of who you are, anchoring yourself at what you're trying to achieve, taking in, U.S. government policy or the administration's policy, and trying to push that forward, realizing that there will be very limited feedback in terms of how well you're doing that, how well you're implementing, how well you're executing. The first time you'll hear something typically is if something goes wrong. And so that requires you to have a good sense of who you are, be anchored in the moment, that it is not about being right or wrong. It is about contributing to a process. And then this process is to move and advance U.S. foreign policy. And when I take that view, it makes it possible for me to sit at the decision-making tables and weather the disagreements, right? Because there will be discussions and people can disagree. And sometimes you'll find that, people will find you're the only one with that position.
Right.
And the tendency would be, if you're not anchored, you're like, well, I have to be wrong. Everyone else disagrees with me. And you want to change your point of view. I've learned, and this is the biggest lesson I've learned, no, that is not my job. My job is to give you my best advice. And if you disagree with that, then you disagree with that. But I am contributing to a process where we're vetting the issues from A to Z. And so that we are putting this on the table for other decision makers higher than us to say, okay, here are the menu of options. Here's what's before us. They have discussed this. Here, based on all of that, here's the best path forward. To not do that, to not give my best advice is a failure in leadership.
Right. No, I think, I think we've all been in those positions, right? So whether it's Steve or I, where we sit within an organization, based on, where we've, risen to are in our careers, right? It's oftentimes, right, it's lonely at the top, and you got to take all that feedback from those below you, take all those data points and make the best decision that you can make. And hopefully it's grounded in good values. I would say absent of beliefs, because beliefs can change, but, unbiased, unprejudiced, good decision, sound decision making, and you live with that decision. And you're right. Things never get brought up if everything's going great, right?
Yeah.
I would offer an interesting perspective as well. So you're, out there interfacing with countries and state level, organizations that aren't US led. We have interests, but we don't really have a forcing function, if you will. Like, it's purely negotiation, diplomacy, and finding like a common purpose and why between the two organizations. I can't even imagine what that's like personally. Eric is hitting the nail on the head. We go through, leadership development programs and, ability to coach and mentor and negotiate and work amongst ourselves inside of an organization. But in our organizations, there's still someone in charge that takes the risk or takes the decision points and has to make it so that we can keep moving forward. Can you describe a little bit about when you're stymied, when there's kind of there is a point that maybe the advice that you said you're giving isn't being listened to or heard, but for whatever reason, and there's an impasse? Can you what do you do in that moment from a leadership lens?
Yeah. And I've had this, and it's hard. It's hard. Or as you might say, it's tricky. Because
thanks for the plug, by the
way. No, it is, because I had a situation not long ago where I found myself being the sole person in a leadership position who had the position that I had. And at first I thought, am I crazy? Like, I think I understand that this is, I don't think I'm off the mark here. I think I'm giving very good advice. But the pressure kept coming, like, no, this is not, you're off the mark. This is not the path that we need to go down. And I kept giving my rationale as to, no, I disagree. I'm this is my point of view. I'm very certain that based on all the information I have, based on my interactions with my interlocutors, this is what we should be doing. And the pressure kept coming, like, no, you need to change course. And then, so you have to be careful. So I reached out to people I trusted and said, hey, here's a situation. And I never tell people specifically, because you never want to give them all the details. That's also not a good thing. So I just said, here is generally the situation I'm facing. What do you think? And these are people that I trust. And so they would say, they don't tell me yes or no. They say, here's something to consider. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And ultimately, do you think you're going to win this argument? Do you think that, and in this case, it was very important when there were a couple people. They said, do you think you're going to win this argument? And I said, well, wait a minute. why does that matter if I'm going to win the argument or not? In my view, this is the right thing to do. This is how we would advance American foreign policy. And so I don't know that I have to ultimately win out here. There's a position that I have, and I have to give that advice. Um, and we have mechanisms to do that within the Department of State. And I used every single one of those mechanisms to make sure that my position, my point of view was heard and evaluated. And when I got an official response back of like, we disagree with you, but we appreciate you for continuing to advocate in this fashion, then I said, okay, because now leadership had the information, they could make a decision. I knew that I had been heard, and they disagreed. That's fine. But what I didn't want to do was back away from my position simply because everyone else said you're wrong. And here's why it matters. By pushing it, no, I didn't win the argument, but I changed the scope such that other considerations were brought in that strengthened the policy that did move forward. And I received from senior leadership an appreciation for doing that. And it did make a difference. It made a difference in terms of money and resources. It made a difference in terms of how others were going to perceive our actions and our policy, all because I could weather everyone telling me you're wrong.
I think so. Many thoughts are coming to my mind. I love how you have to double down on what you said is right in your heart of hearts. You don't back down. I think that's what I'm hearing you communicate. So, kind of to the listeners, if there's something that I would want to like foot stomp here, and then we'll continue on. This happens more times than not, and even like I mentioned earlier, the vignette was like inside of an organization, but even between organizations, if you're trying to negotiate like an agreement between, monies or accesses to a thing that, both of you have a common interest in, you're going to get to those points, but you can't relinquish, like I think, Eric, you said it earlier, the core value that like we hold
Right.
together true. And you have to show strength there. Because when you waver or you potentially don't have that solid footing and foundation, it doesn't allow others to see like strength in what your platform and what your leadership kind of is at the end of the day. What are your thoughts, Eric?
No, I think there's been many situations, as you know who I am, Steve. I stand on being my authentic self always. And that always doesn't always align with other people's kind of I don't want to say it's their agenda, right? Or their want to further their own cause or their own, gain their own political, credits. I believe in maintaining my authentic self and following my true north. And I feel like if you stay that path, you'll always be grounded in your own values. Because oftentimes a lot of folks they'll waver, right? Because they think there's going to be this quick gain, but in the long run, right, your name is associated with that and your legacy is associated with that. And if you're a person that wavers all of the time, you could tarnish all of that work that you've put in up to that point. So I just for the listeners, for everyone out there, is continue on your true north, and be your authentic self always, especially in leadership. There's a few things that I always talk about, honesty, empathy, accountability, and trust. And you can't get to that trust if you're not being your authentic self. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but
Well,
yeah.
and the one thing I would add there, Eric, is, and this is something that I really appreciated, when I was speaking to one of my mentors, and finally the mentor said, okay, if you're going to do this, here's what you need to understand. Here's the kind of pressure you're going to come under. This is what it's going to look like. This is the form that it's going to take. Are you prepared for that?
Right.
And that's also something I would say to your listeners. As you rise, be that kind of mentor. help the person do the right thing or to be themselves, to be their authentic selves. Don't encourage people to give in because it's the easier path, because you don't learn anything from that.
Right.
And plus, at the end of the day, nor are you going to be a benefit to the organization if you cannot follow your own judgment.
Right. No, that's fair. So, yeah, so I really wanted to touch on, because you talked about being in Zambia. I know you're in the United States, and I met you in Germany. So you are well traveled. You talk about being in Japan and taking your test, and where else have you been? Assigned over
Let's
your time.
see. My inaugural post in the Foreign Service was Malaysia, then India, Afghanistan, Australia, Indonesia, the National War College in Washington, D.C., and then I had a job working for the European Bureau for a couple years, and then I went to Germany where I was the Consul General, and then I came back to the States last year, and now I'm serving as a diplomat in residence, responsible for Washington, D.C., Delaware, Maryland, and West Virginia. This is my region where I try to encourage and inspire students and young professionals to think about a career in diplomacy.
Nice. Yeah. So, Steve and I, we've traveled the world, right? And we've seen a lot of places as well. And we know that, each assignment or each location presents its own unique challenges and opportunities. Two questions, right? One, what was your favorite assignment? And then second, how did you adapt to the cultural differences in those locations?
I won't say favorite, but probably the most memorable. And they always say this is your first tour is your most unforgettable tour.
Right.
And in my case, it happens to be true. And it was because of this. It was Malaysians really were truly hospitable. That here in the United States, you might go bar hopping, but Malaysians go restaurant hopping. So they would say, hey, let's go out for coffee. And they just really wanted to have coffee to introduce their cuisine, their culture, the cities. And they're like, oh, let's go to this place. There's a really good restaurant. And then you'd end up restaurant hopping to different ones and sampling different food and going to different places. And so because of that cultural experience, I was able to visit 7 out of the 9 provinces in Malaysia, and so I got a really good understanding of Malaysians and a really good understanding of the country, and to be able to travel around, and that's what makes the experience, is when you can really immerse yourself in the culture with the people, learn truly how and why the country functions the way it does. Yeah, that was just a memorable. That was an indelible experience. Now that's me. On the other side, the post or the assignment where my family was, in German they say zufrieden, everyone was satisfied. My son, my wife, me. That was Germany. Everyone was, no one had any issues. My son was like, okay, I like the school eventually, not initially. My wife really liked living in Hamburg. She really enjoyed it. I loved the experience. So that was a place for the entire family. Now, I can't compare it to Malaysia because our son was born in Malaysia, so he wasn't there yet.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. I think you just like the food, though. It's fine.
Yeah, we need to bring back that restaurant hopping culture. We need to have that in the States. I like that.
Yeah, somebody mentioned to me a couple months ago that, and I didn't notice this. It's like if you go visit even if I go like for a German engagement, like with a German partner or something, or even when I was out in Poland, they always offer you food, drink, and it's more of a social atmosphere when you get in there, right? And you kind of start working your way up into like getting to know each other. Then you jump into business. Every time we host an event, I mean, we might have some snacks or coffee in the corner, but it's like straight to work. It's like, hey, if you need to use the restroom, it's over there. If you need to get a cookie or a coffee, it's over there. Help yourselves. But we're getting down to business, right? There's no warming up to it. And we got to bring that to America. We got to bring that to just our engagements. It's like, let's just pause for a minute, get to know each other over coffee or tea or something like that, juice. But let's start with the food. I think everyone likes to eat. It's just,
I mean, drive down anywhere USA and there's restaurants galore. I mean, the only
Right.
bad thing is restaurant hopping here is you're taking your life in your own hands by having to cross lanes of traffic to go anywhere.
right,
But I
right,
think that that's required. And eventually you're going to have to do it. If you skip that step, because that really is step one, eventually you're going to have to get there before you can come to an agreement or have a negotiation.
right.
That's what I found from my experience. So you might as well do that up front, meaning I'll give you an example. So almost in all of my positions, I have always, for when I'm supervising people on a staff, for the first usually 20 to 30 minutes of the day, I go around and I'm just saying hi, hello. I don't even go to my office. I don't go to my office the first thing out of the day and turn on the computer, because once you're there, you're trapped. You got to go around and just talk to people. Well, that allows them to know, hey, I'm open. Is there any issue? I can see how they're doing. Oh, there's something, you don't look like you're doing okay, or is something bothering you? You can address things right away. And it's the same thing when you're meeting people initially. You gotta talk to them like, hey, where are you from? Like, what kind of food do you like? What brought you here? You have to do that, because what you're doing is looking for these common connections. And it's only when you find those that you
Right.
find, oh, okay, now I want to work with that person. I want this to be successful. If you just start with, let's get down to business, if unless it's an emergency situation, that's the only time I would say you got to get down to business. You don't have time, right? You got to deal with the issue. Other than that, I would say that you definitely have to spend your time trying to find those threads of commonality.
Well, I'm gonna plug an episode Eric and I did. We talked about, is it mission first or is it people first? And I think the common denominator we both came into, and again, I'm speaking for Eric a little bit here, so correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a hot minute since we've had this combo, but I think we agreed it's people first. You got to have those relationships and
Always.
bonds, and it drives the mission. It will drive the accomplishments and the execution. And me staying up, into the wee hours of the night, getting after a task that's due tomorrow because I know you're in it with me. We have these battle scars together, and we're going to have this like cool story to talk about one day down the road, but we're doing it together. And there's this it's hard to say. It's a common bond and a common thing between one to more persons. And we're being general too. Like, the American mindset is, execution, production. Let's go make profit. Let's go be efficient. Let's just get after the work. I sense that there's something changing in the air. I gotta really, so Darion, let's bring it to the real world and like what's going on the past 2 to 3 years. You said going around meeting people that first thing in the morning. How do you do that virtually? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.